This came together very quickly for us as things have taken place on the border in the last few weeks. I know folks in my congregation have been very alarmed at what is going on. And the first question always is, what can we do? We use a lot of words, but what can we do comes up first. And often the answer is we can start by learning. And we learned that this presentation was going on down in Santa Fe last week, and realized none of us could make it there. Mike Adams here made a phone call to find out if they were free to come up and repeat the program here. And they were on a Tuesday night, so 4 days notice, here we all are. Thank you for coming again, and to talk to us about what is happening, please welcome Allegra Love from the Santa Fe Revolution Project.
Los Alamos for inviting me. This is the first time I've ever come to speak in Los Alamos, which is a really awesome experience for me. And I have to tell you, this is probably the biggest turnout I've ever seen in like a new community I've showed up at. I've showed up in like Farmington before, and there's like one person standing there like, is this where you get the pizza? And I'm like, yeah, cool. Can I yell at you about immigration for an hour? And they're like, oh, I just wanted a pizza. So it's really, really heartening to see a group of people coming out to take a chance and to do some learning. It was just mentioned, but learning is absolutely the first step to activism around what's going on in the border. I wouldn't be standing here right now about to expertly describe these issues to you for about 45 minutes with Q&A after, if I hadn't spent a whole portion of my life devoting myself to learning about this. And that time isn't over. I read every night. I read, these days, like hundreds of emails about what's going on with this crisis. I read the media. I comb the media for the best explanations I can find about it. Please, 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 I'm gonna say a couple things like, if this is the one thing you take away tonight, I'm gonna say that a few times. This will be the first time. If this is the one thing you take away tonight, learning is activism. And if you've ever been on the internet or social media, you know how much crap is out there. And that can be very, very dangerous when it comes to protecting the lives of vulnerable people. And so our jobs as activists is to always start with a point of clarity, a point of deep understanding, being able to hold complexity and not being binary in our thinking politically and thinking about human lives, and really, really trying to gain rich and deep understanding of an issue so we can effectively solve it. And when you're talking to a community of scientists, I know you all get that, right? So just to introduce myself, because I know a lot of you are not familiar with the work we do in Santa Fe, and you're not familiar with me. And I like don't, like I'm in like a sweatsuit with like a backwards cap on. You're like, this is the lawyer? I get it, I don't look like a lawyer and I don't talk like a lawyer, but I just wanted to give you a sense of my credentials and where I'm coming from and my career thus far working on this issue, so you can understand the deep background that this information I'm about to share with you is coming from. I was a public school teacher in Santa Fe for several years. Back in the aughts during the Bush administration, and some incidents were happening then, like a lot of what is happening around our country right now. And there was an ICE raid. ICE, there's so many acronyms in immigration law. Most of you probably know ICE is Immigration, Customs, and Enforcement. But there was an ICE raid, I think it was 2005 in our community, and I was working at a public school for mostly Mexican families, a bilingual public school, and our class size dwindled really, really low. The people weren't deported. They were just too scared to come out and come to school, essentially, because there was so much terror in the community. And I was young and pretty uninformed, and decided it was time to start learning, right? Just like a lot of you are doing right now. And I started studying immigration. I started traveling to the border, volunteering at organizations, to try and figure out what was going on, to try and understand the political atmosphere, the policies, the cultural aspects of like the phenomena of immigration in our country. And I got super angry and super sad, and then like in a blackout of rage, signed up for the LSAT. And that was 10 years ago. And I graduated from UNM Law School, and I have been, I'm barred in the state of New Mexico and the immigration courts. And I run a nonprofit here in New Mexico called Santa Fe Dreamers Project. Now, the reason it's called Santa Fe Dreamers Project is because my career started where I was like cruising the high schools of Santa Fe, like talking to kids and being like, yo, are you a dreamer? I'm gonna get you your papers. And then I needed some money to keep doing that. So they were like, make a nonprofit. And I said, okay. They were like, what do you wanna call it? I said, Santa Fe Dreamers. This was 6 years ago. We've since expanded our services to serve so many more people than dreamers. And the goal of our nonprofit, up until Trump was elected, was to simply provide the tools that immigrant families needed to succeed through legal representation. Our tagline is often, immigrants make us stronger. And we're hoping that through targeting families who needed legal services and giving them free representation, we could help change some of the elements of poverty that affect New Mexico. And we could help provide immigrant families with the tools they need for progress, economically, educationally, culturally, and help pull them in from the fringes and improve everyone's life in New Mexico by having a stronger, more capable immigrant community. That's what it was up until recently. The problem is now that Trump was elected, there's a full-on assault against the immigrant community. And we've had to take a step back, but we've had to sort of expand laterally to start working on defensive issues and trying to put ourselves between the government and our immigrant clients and make sure that they're being kept safe. And that has expanded our work out to Cibola County Detention Facility, and I'm gonna tell you guys a little bit more about that in a moment, where we work with asylum seekers who are detained in Cibola County. We have 2 ICE facilities in the state of New Mexico, and that's one of them. And then it's taking us to the border now, and we're about to send our 2 operatives from our organization on short-term contracts to go start doing rapid response relief work on the border around the children. My own personal experiences with border work is from working in family detention. In 2014, when Obama revived the practice of family detention in Artesia, which we're gonna get to, I packed up my pickup truck and drove down there and was like, how can I help? And my life has never been the same since. And I've been working on national teams to end family detention, to improve the rights of asylum seekers, and to improve due process and conditions in immigrant detention facilities, ultimately to abolish them. But that's what my work is on a national level. And on an international level, I've had the opportunities to work in refugee caravans and refugee camps throughout the Central American migrant corridor and advise migrants on their rights as they're moving forward to seek asylum. I'm an asylum lawyer in court, but mostly I'm just like an executive director who does this sort of stuff and works on outreach and bringing people together. Wow, that was a long resume. But I hope what it can tell you is that I am deeply involved in these issues, and I've spent almost a decade studying them now, and I'm so happy that you're here to listen and learn from what I've learned, and we can go forward from there. All right? So the big question is, where do we start? A lot of people would like to think that all of this mess started 2 weeks ago or 6 weeks ago when Trump decided to start separating children from their families. I think the first thing, here's the one thing I want you to take away from this. Family separation is not a Trump doctrine. It is an American doctrine, right? And we have examples all over history of how our political administrations have used separating families as tools for control. We were just speaking earlier, Mike and I, about how we did this to Native American families. And I'm not an expert on that, so I'm not gonna go on about it, but everyone knows what I'm talking about. Let's think about slave families, how we separated slave families as a tool for control. We've been doing it in the immigration context for about as long as immigration laws have existed in this country, which is since 1860s. I give another talk called Immigration 101, which I'm happy to come back and do, which talks about the history of how this all started, which I'll spare you. But this is not a new thing. But it's also not a new thing in the sense that this was a huge, huge, huge part of the Obama administration. And people want to think, like, people who are anti-Trump, for example, want to think, not my president. I didn't vote for him. I'm not conservative. I don't like his laws. But this is something that was going on during the Obama administration. This is architecture that Obama constructed and Trump is building off of. Sometimes the analogy, I like to use a football analogy, like Obama ran this ball to the 75-yard line and Trump and Sessions picked it up and are now spiking it in the end zone. It's hard to hear because we want to think of ourselves, especially like I'm like an Obama girl. I want to think of myself as not complicit in what is going on our border right now, but the fact of the matter is this has been happening for a long time and a lot of us were not paying attention. This isn't to make anyone feel bad. Like I have no interest in criticizing anyone who wants to come out and learn. It's to understand that like if we are unwilling to understand what is happening in a historical context, in a context that is larger than bipartisan politics, if we can't do that, then we're going to be unable to find the solution out of it. There's just no historical precedent for solving something like this if we're going to stick within our own parties. And it's it's not going that well with the Democrats in Congress right now. So we're going to have to find a way to bridge that gap if we're going to actually solve this problem. And this problem has reached a really critical point. In terms of learning, the place I want to start is 1997. And that was when the Flores settlement happened. There was a young girl named Flores. She was like 15. And sometime in the 80s, she sued the US government because she was being held in an adult prison, an immigration prison. She was from El Salvador. And she was having to sleep with like adult males in the prison, bathe with them. And she was like subjected to all kinds of things like strip searches and stuff like that. And essentially, this is a human rights violation, civil rights violation. And she sued the government. And anyone who understands lawsuits, like this probably happened in like 1983. The actual settlement comes out in 1997. And it's called the Flores Settlement Agreement. And this is like one of the key, like the cornerstones or like the keys to understanding what is happening now is understanding the Flores Settlement. What the Flores Settlement says is you can't detain children in federal prison. You can't detain them in immigration prison, and you sure can't detain them in criminal federal prisons. Anyone who comes to the border under the age of 18 cannot, under any circumstances, be held in federal prison. That's what the Flores Settlement says. They have to be sent to a place with the least restrictive conditions possible, and with no unnecessary delay, they have to be put into the custody of an appropriate family member or foster parent, right? That's the Flores Settlement. And what it did was it provided a legal mechanism to keep children out of federal prison. But where do you put them, right? What they decided was that they would use a different department. ICE, Border Patrol, that's the Department of Homeland Security. Instead, the custody would be transferred to the Department of Health and Human Services, HHS. And further into the department, the Office of Refugee Resettlement. So the Office of Refugee Resettlement, when kids arrive on the border and they're under 18, takes custody of them. And their job is not to detain them indefinitely. It's not to torture them. It's not to keep them in cages. Their job is, with no unnecessary delay, in the least restrictive conditions possibly, to get them out of custody and into the like independent custody of a family member, or if a family member cannot be located, to a foster parent or like some sort of relative or friend that their family appoints. This system worked well for a while, right? That's probably why you didn't hear about it in like 2001 or 1999, because we weren't seeing a massive influx of children on our border. parents who were with, this was also largely only children who showed up unaccompanied, right? Without a biological parent. Parents who showed up with their children were generally, they use a mechanism called parole to bring them in. Parole is when you get to a border or when you're arrested near a border and you are pulled in and sort of just like, I guess it would be like released on your own recognizance. It doesn't mean they're releasing you into the United States to disappear and live a happy life. It means that they're releasing you into a community and you're gonna get a letter to show up in immigration court and be deported. And then you find a lawyer and you find a way to stop it. But it's not like, oh, just here, go along. Parole just means, like if my sister was paroled in with me, she and my nephews would come live at my house, and then weeks, months, years later, eventually, because the courts move slow, a notice to appear in El Paso Immigration Court would arrive at the door, and they'd say, you're being deported. You need to show up in immigration court. And it largely worked, right? But what happened was, in 2014, oh no, I'm backing up, hold on. We're gonna go back to 2009. Throughout the 2000s, George Bush was using this thing called family detention. There was this facility called T-Don Hutto, it was outside of Austin, where they would detain families together. Meaning, and when we say families, I don't mean fathers, mothers and their child. They'd separate dad from the pack at the border, put him into adult detention, if they didn't parole them in. And with like some families, and I'm not exactly sure how they sorted through, they'd put them into this setting called family detention, where women and children are detained together. A violation of the Flores settlement? Absolutely. So the suits started to happen, right? They're saying, this is violating Flores. You can't hold kids in federal prison. It doesn't matter if they're with their kids. And the lawsuits mounted up, and the lawsuits kept coming. And also, like, there's no possible way you can humanely detain a child. So there were more lawsuits. And in 2009, after his first election, Obama decided they were gonna end the practice of family detention for good in the United States. And he kept one small facility open in Berks, Pennsylvania, like in case of emergency, in case you need to emergency detain. But there's like 30 beds or something. And closed down Hutto and said, we're done with family detention in the United States. And they paroled everyone, all mother and child units in because they didn't have bed space for them. What happened in 2014 is, and I'm sure most of you remember, there was what's known as, wait, I promise to use the mic, the surge, right? Central America for the decade before 2014 is destabilizing. The northern triangle of Central America, Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador, just falling into the hands of transnational gangs. And as the security forces are losing their ability to control the gangs, a certain lawlessness is emerging because there are no security forces, right? And so in response, that's what we call in immigration a push factor, right? And so in response to this push factor of monstrous gang activity in the Northern Triangle, I mean, stuff that would just make your skin crawl and the hair stand up on the back of your neck, murdering children, kill or be killed policies to get into gangs, just disgusting things, which are just like, there's a long history of you can find with a light internet search. In response to this whole wave of unaccompanied children in the early aughts starts coming to the border. And what happens is they're coming and they're coming and they're coming, and they totally, in 2014, just basically fill up the entire system, the shelter system that the Office of Refugee Resettlement has. Again, they're not going into prison, they're being diverted into ORR, but ORR has never had to accommodate 60,000 children in one summer before. And essentially that's what happened in 2014. And so there's this crisis, much like we're having now on the border, and they start to put kids in camps. And then the Obama administration is like, well, how do we stop these kids from coming, right? We can't violate the Flores settlement. We can't detain them. We can't deport them. They have all these rights. So what can we do? We can start targeting the family units. And with that, the Obama administration reopens family detention in our state, in Artesia, New Mexico, in a makeshift camp at the Federal Law Enforcement Training center, FLETC is what it's called. And they detained 2,000 women and children, average age 6, and said, we're gonna deport them all. This strategy is known as deterrence through detention, by saying we can't control refugee flow. We can't control the Mara Salvatrucha, we can't control the Mara 18, those are the gangs in Central America. We can't stop the push factors. But what we can do is try and make the reception that they have in this country so cruel that it will prevent them from coming to this country and asking for political asylum. So what's problematic about that? A lot. Asylum seekers in the Western Hemisphere have to be physically in the country to ask for refuge. There are no refugee camps like there are in Europe and Asia, not Asia, Africa. Like, you can't go to a UN refugee camp and say, help, my life is in danger, and live in a tent and have your papers adjudicated. We don't have refugee camps in the Western Hemisphere. But we are signatories since the 1950s, right after the Holocaust, not a coincidence. We became signatories to the UN Refugee Convention that said we would respect the rights of people leaving their countries to seek political asylum. Meaning if they can arrive at our border, whether that's knocking on the door at the port of entry or putting 2 feet over the Rio Grande and into our country, if they can get there and they tell us their life is in danger, we are required to take that seriously, and we are required to give them a full adjudication of their claim to make sure that when we remove them, if we send them back to their country, their lives are not in danger. It's a very old principle, the principle of non-refoulement, meaning we will not send people back into their countries to get murdered. So the problem with detention through deterrence is we know we're deterrence through detention, we know we're signatories to the Refugee Convention. And we know we can't stop people from coming. But we decided that in 2014, in the Obama administration, that we would make it as inhumane and inflict as much suffering as possible on asylum seekers so that they might stop coming. But what's the problem there? When you are running for your life, do you think detention stops you? There's always a poem that I reference when I talk about this topic, and it's called Home, and it's by Warson Shire, and the opening lines are, nobody leaves home unless home is the mouth of a shark. I've been on the migrant trails in Mexico. There's a train called the Beast that people ride on top of. I'm almost certain many of you have seen images of it. If not, just Google it. I can tell you in person, watching a mother throw her baby on top of a freight train, I always start crying when I talk about this because it's so devastating. Watching and I'm looking at my dear friend and her baby and thinking about it. But watching a mother throw her baby on top of a freight train in the middle of Mexico, you have to, is that person gonna be deterred by a federal prison? Whatever's chasing that person is way worse than being in a federal prison. And I have to tell you, it's way worse than handing your baby over on the border to federal authorities and saying goodbye to them. And so this idea that we can inflict, that there's a cruelty that we can inflict that will make these women stop coming with their babies means that these politicians don't understand motherhood, right? They don't understand fatherhood. And they don't understand the love that people have for their own children and their own lives. So this was when Obama really started hammering this in. But the Obama administration, believe me, I've talked to Obama administration officials about this. They had this idea to start separating families on the border. They had it, and they realized they realized it was going to be a bridge too far. They realized it was too cruel to do what Trump implemented, the zero tolerance policy. They thought it was too cruel, and they knew that the optics wouldn't last. That millions of American citizens were not going to sit still and watch women be ripped from their children on the border. So they knew they knew that this was an option, and they chose not to take it. But like I said, they have the ball on the 75-yard line, and they're like, we're not gonna do this. But we're gonna keep detaining women and children. And we're gonna set up family detention facilities on our border. There's 3 in our country right now. The little one in Pennsylvania, still a problem. And we managed to shut Artesia down, but no one was ever gonna keep Artesia open. It was temporary. And instead we got corporate contracts with the Correctional Corporation of America, and we set up a 2,400 bed facility in South Texas called the South Texas Family Residential Facility. It's a jail, but it's called the Family Residential Facility. It has 24 beds, and I think the average age of children inside of there is still 6. That is at capacity right now, which will make you understand why yesterday they called off the prosecutions of immigrant women, is because that jail is at capacity. It costs us $330 a night to detain a child in that facility, a night. Right? So when it's at capacity, it's costing us about $1 million a day to keep open to detain babies. We call it baby jail in my line of work because we don't want to call it the South Texas Family Residential Facility. And that is owned by a corporation called the no, it's not Correctional Corporation of America. They rebranded. It turns out when you are constantly violating human rights, you have to rebrand every 3 years. What is it called? Core Civic. It's the facility I work in out here in Cibola. They own it too. These are correctional corporations who, much like other major lobbies, much like the NRA, they put money into politicians' pockets to make sure that they can continue to operate in the states we live in. So in 2014 to now, these corporations, Core Civic, and the other huge one in the United States is called the GEO Group. They're having their best quarters ever, continually, while we are detaining immigrants on our border. And not even on our border, in the shadows of our states where no one's looking, like in Cibola County. And so this is, the architecture of all this is set up, and then we elect Trump, who makes no secret about his anti-immigrant feelings, right? A lot of people think that's why he was elected. He rode the wave of that anti-immigrant sentiment in our country all the way to the office, and then can't get it done like he needs to, right? He wants to shut down the borders with a wall. He wants to kill DACA, and it's just not happening, right? Because we have laws and due processes, and this is just not a country where you can rule like that. The issue is that the one place where he has a whole bunch of latitude is enforcement. It's like a social studies lesson for 6th graders. Congress makes the laws, the judicial branch interprets them, and the president enforces them. And so he can operate with ICE with a certain latitude that he can't get laws changing Congresses or manipulate the court. So what the zero tolerance policy is, have you guys heard the Department of Homeland Security head, Kirstjen Nielsen, go on TV and say, we have no policy of family separation? As much as I hate to say this, she's not lying. There is no policy of family separation in the United States right now. What it is that they have decided to start prosecuting the misdemeanor offense of crossing the border without papers. It's called illegal entry. It's a misdemeanor. And adults who are alone get charged with it all the time. But they've always declined from prosecuting family units because they would have to separate the children. Because when you charge someone with a misdemeanor federal offense, they have to go into a federal prison. And because of the Flores settlement, they have to separate the children. You cannot put a child into a criminal federal prison. That's the zero tolerance policy, right? So when she was saying we don't have a policy of family separation, she wasn't lying. And when Trump says this is about the democratic law, he's talking about the Flores settlement. But it's backwards, right? He's saying if you didn't have the Flores settlement, we wouldn't have to do this. What he means is if you didn't have the Flores settlement, we would be able to detain the children with their parents in this federal prison and we wouldn't be separating them. You see the trick there? And so the only policy change that they had, there was no policy change. Nothing got written. They simply were like, look, we've been not prosecuting these border entries, this misdemeanor, forever. Because the optics on that what would happen if we did start to prosecute them would be really bad. And then the Trump administration was like, sounds good to us, and started doing it. This was about 6 weeks ago. And this is what has brought our country to the fever pitch that it is now in terms of awareness and horror about what is happening on our border. So a couple things about the separation. We've all heard the images from the cages and seen the images from the cages. They are horrible. That is ICE and Customs and Border Protection. That is the Department of Homeland Security who's doing that. Those cages, the cages are called pereras, which is Spanish for dog pound. I mean, just like let that soak in, that we're putting little babies in places we call the dog pound. And the other images you're seeing are from the hieleras, and those are the ice boxes because they put people in there for, they hold them and they're like freezing. They're notoriously freezing. They don't get blankets or food, and they're huddled together because they're really, really air conditioning because we're Americans and we like air conditioning on the border. And they're kept at like 60 degrees and everyone freezes half to death in the hieleras. And so what's happening is they're holding families in the hieleras and the pereras, then they're taking the parents to federal custody. I mean, this was up until recently, when this all came to head. They were taking parents into federal custody to charge them with misdemeanors, then give them time served and get them over to ICE. But to use the charging documents for those misdemeanors as a mechanism to then separate them and get the kids into ORR custody as per the Flores settlement. Right? So I take personal, like, I've been getting a little, like, crabby about this on my social media stuff, is that, like, by the time the kids get out of Customs and Border Protection, a terrible thing has happened, a very terrible thing. But once they're in ORR custody, those people are trying to get them to a safe place. That is their job. Does it always go well? Absolutely not, right? Do they always take care of them as well as they can? No. Sometimes they're in like a weird makeshift Walmart. It's terrible. We've all heard on Democracy Now! That they're being abused. But rather than embattle these places, because this isn't the Department of Homeland Security, these are people whose job it is, with no unnecessary delay, in the least restrictive conditions possible, to get them to family members. My opinion is, rather than embattle them, is to support them and to insist on oversight and the absolute best care, and to say, like, what do you need to get these kids out faster, right? How can we help you move these kids through this system as fast as possible and get them somewhere safe? That's just my 2 cents. The other thing is, like, there was this whole story about the 1,500 lost children. I know those kids. I don't know all 1,500 of them. I know a lot of them, though, because they live in Santa Fe. They're not lost, right? Trump was trying to erode support for the Office of Refugee Resettlement. Again, he is trying to destroy the Flores settlement so he can detain children in federal prison. He was trying to erode support, and so they started talking about how this agency can't even keep track of kids. What had happened was they were making calls to try and find these kids, and a lot of them weren't picking up the phone. Why? Maybe they're at work. Or maybe they were scared because ICE is hunting down families in the streets and arresting them, and they were scared to pick up a call from the Department of Homeland Security. But they're living in communities where there's law enforcement, where there is CYFD, if you're in New Mexico, where we have police, we have FBI. If those kids are being trafficked, they're in communities that can catch that. They're not lost, they just don't want to be found. And there's a big difference between that. But what happened is we all went crazy, right? Oh my God, Office of Refugee Resettlement, you lost these kids, you can't be trusted. And Trump said, great, let's not let them release them, let's have them keep them in detention. Or better yet, let's destroy the Flores settlement. It's all part of this propaganda that's moving through our country and preying on the fact that hardly any of us understand what the heck's going on. It's okay, that's why we're all here. So what happened last Wednesday is Trump issued an executive order. And he said, we're no longer gonna separate families. You guys, I listened to you, I'm not into the abject misery that's being caused. So I'm gonna stop separating families. But you have to look at the text of the executive order. And what it says is we don't wanna separate families, We don't want that. So what we're going to do is we're going to have the attorney general and the judges and legal procedure stuff to unravel the Flores settlement, right? That's what the executive order says. It doesn't say, let's let them all go and be safe and comfortable and stay together. They're saying, yeah, families belong together in federal detention. And since we can't hold them in criminal detention, we'll hold them in family detention. So essentially, it is reverting back to the hated Obama-era policy of family detention, and the Trump administration is acting like it's a gift to us, right? You got what you wanted. And we're going back to the exact same system that was developed in 2014, which up until 2 weeks ago was the worst thing I've ever seen in my life. And the worst way I've ever seen humans treated is now being presented to me as a gift because I complain so much about family separation. Families belong together, but not in jail. And the Trump's executive orders is saying, yeah, you guys can stay together, but if you're gonna whine so much about staying together, we're gonna detain you indefinitely and seek to deport you. And we're gonna detain you in places where there are no lawyers, and we're gonna detain you in places where we're actively eroding due process when it comes to asylum seeking. And good luck, have fun, you asked for this. That's exactly what that executive order says. And then yesterday they said, and by the way, we're gonna stop prosecuting families. You're welcome. But if you read the text of those articles, like the headlines are sort of tricky because they're like, Trump ends prosecution of families. That's not what happened at all. They suspended the program because they ran out of bed space in our borderland prisons. And they need to take a pause and regroup so they can build the infrastructure to do it more efficiently and to do it more viciously. There has been no retreat from this, except for the fact that they're going to allow families to stay together if they are incarcerated, and no longer give parents the opportunity to get their kids into ORR custody and get them into a safe place. I asked my sister this. I don't have any kids, but I have 2 little nephews. And I asked her, if you came to the border and you could pass Woody and Clint off to ORR custody, as scary as that would be, but you knew they would get to me and they could get into my arms, like, would you do that? Or would you want them detained with you? Okay, so that's like a dumb question. Both are horrible choices. Horrible choices. But it's a real choice. And she was like, I don't know, I think if I knew they were gonna get to you, I might give them over to the government to keep them safe. She's like, no, I could never do that. I'm like, well, do you want them with you for 9 months in a federal prison? And she's like, I don't want that either. So the options, there's no good options for asylum seekers right now, right? There's just no good options. And then sort of that's like the state of affairs of where we're at today. So I know that everyone is gonna have a question of what can we do, and I'm very prepared to answer that question. I'm not normally, but I came prepared today. Do we have any questions about the policy? And I'm just hoping we can stick to questions. I understand that there are people here who have feelings about this. You can tell I have a lot, but I'm hoping that you can take something and learn from this and editorialize in the spaces that you want to, and we don't have time for everyone to stand up and say their opinion, and I'm sure there's various. If we could just keep to questions, and if you want to come and talk to me about it or talk with this community later, I'm sure we can find space for that. But are there any questions about the policy? Yeah.
Or actually legitimate asylum seekers?
I couldn't know that. I couldn't actually answer that question. I think that the important thing to understand is that that's not our job to know at this moment. That's what we have courts for, right? And so when an asylum seeker comes to the border, whether it's crossing illegally or to a port of entry, the first interview that they have is called the credible fear interview. It's a threshold interview where you get to describe, it's a 3-hour interview with an asylum officer, a trained asylum officer, where you get to describe the reason you're asking for asylum. And if you can't pass that interview, you're put in expedited removal and sent back to your country. Most people do pass it though, because most people are fleeing something. And it's a pretty low standard, it's a pretty easy threshold to get to, right? To get through the credible fear interview. Once you pass that interview on our border, you're put into an asylum, like a track, I guess, in court, where they're like, okay, now an immigration judge is going to adjudicate your asylum claim. And our courts are so overburdened right now because of Obama's and Trump's, I mean, let's be honest, Bush's policies, because we've just taxed the courts so much that sometimes that takes like years to get to actually put in your legitimate asylum claim. So we have the mechanisms to evaluate who is and isn't an asylum, a bona fide asylum seeker. It's called our immigration judges. We can't evaluate that in the Allegra's or the Pereiras on the border. That's not where we're supposed to be doing it. So your question is legit, but my answer is I don't know. We have to wait for them to get through the court systems. And if an immigration judge says, yes, you win asylum, great. And if they say, no, you're deported. The problem is we've so overburdened our system that something that should take a month is now taking, some of my guys are waiting 18 months who are detained because we don't have enough immigration judges who are well-trained enough to actually be adjudicating it. Does that make sense? So I guess we have to wait and see. Jeff Sessions just issued a decision about asylum targeted at Central American claims of gang violence and claims of domestic violence, 2 huge Central American claims, essentially rolling back asylum protections for people who come to the country with those sorts of claims. So I'm guessing we're gonna see a decline in grants of asylum from that region because we are degrading the protection, or at least like the laws around the protection for Central American claims. But we're gonna have to wait and see, and because our courts are so overburdened, it's going to be hard to get a picture immediately, Yeah.
Make sure when you ask the questions, use the microphone so that anyone who's hard of hearing can hear the question. Thank you.
Yeah. Oh, you can decide who gets asked the question. I'm never fair. Okay. Oh, hi. Sorry. Hi.
So I'm wondering, can a non-relative sponsor one of these families
Right.
for a child?
Excellent question. Yes, but no. Isn't that satisfying? There's a priority for where they place kids. It's generally first one biological parent, and a lot of these kids do have many have one biological parent in the country. Then it's with close family members. Then it's with distant family members. So 1, 2, 3. And the 4th category is a appropriate foster parent. And so I've been getting text messages all week like, hey, can you get me a kid? Like, I'd love to get a kid. And I know, and like, it's so hard to make fun of because like, I totally get where that person's heart is at. But like, think about if you want to be a foster parent in the state of New Mexico. It's a huge commitment. It takes like a year. You have to go to counseling. You have to do home visits. Like, I would not pass the test. My house is filthy. So like, there is a way to do it. And if you want to learn how to do it, Health and Human Services, you can contact the Office of Health and Human Services, or also Lutheran Refugee Services. But your commitment to this is probably not going to help this current crisis. It's going to be like the next child crisis. You're going to be ready for it, It's not something that can be done rapidly. Another thing that you need to understand about these border camps where kids are being held, and actually where any federal custody, you cannot get in there to see them. No. It's not going to happen. Maybe if you're a lawyer, maybe if you're a licensed professional in some sort of field that they need, like doctor, mental health professional, maybe. You can try. There are ways in. But average citizen who's just like very sad and wants to go and wants to help, no. There's no way. Also, they're not going to take any of your donations. So you can't send diapers, you can't send toys. They cannot accept them because there's government contractors who are paid to provide all that stuff, and private, they cannot accept. It's crazy. So thinking that you can go down there, thinking that you can send stuff is not necessarily, it's not real. But one place you might look into if you want to volunteer and you want to do donations on the border there's whole shelter systems where when people are released from federal custody, they have to go, it's like almost like a halfway house because they have to be spread out all over the country and they have to get their bearings. In a lot of cases with kids, they have to find their parents to reunite them with them. So they're putting them into these mostly religious shelters, And those places don't have any restrictions on access and on taking material donations. The place closest to us that is handling that is in El Paso and is called Annunciation House. It's part of the Catholic Church, and I've been working with them forever. I talk every day on the phone with their legal director. They are absolutely a fantastic group. My word of advice is wait for them to make the call for volunteers or material goods. There's nothing more difficult in these times to deal with than like a tidal wave of unsolicited offers to be helpful, because it's so meaningful, the people need it, and you just want to, but it's so hard to manage when 1,000 people call you and say, I'm ready to volunteer. And so to be a little patient and wait when they make the call and be ready to respond to it if that's something, and listen to them about what they need, and not to create narratives in our own head about what they need and then get pissed at them when they're like, we actually don't need it. To wait for them to explain to you what's needed and then respond to that call. It takes patience, especially when you're antsy, to get in the fight. It can sometimes take patience, but that's my advice. They'll shut down their phone lines if too many people call. Okay, another question.
Is there some sort of international standard for asylum seekers that says what sort of things a country should offer people asylum for? So if somebody is fleeing violence and it's in one of the categories that Attorney General Sessions happens to not like, is there an international standard of comparison for that?
Right, we have a common refugee definition, and I'm an asylum lawyer, so I should be able to recite it off the top of my head, and I can't. But what it is that someone who has experienced past persecution in their country, and their country is unwilling or unable to avail themselves, or to protect them, right? Like the country either won't protect them or can't protect them, which is a lot of what these Central American cases are. They can't protect them. And in some other countries, it's just that they won't. So those are the sort of where the starting point. But it also has to be on account of one of 5 different things. So what I mean by that is, if I'm walking down the street here in Los Alamos and someone just mugs me, rolls me for all my money and hits me over the head with a pipe, that's persecution. And maybe, I don't know. But why did it happen? Is it because it was in the wrong place at the wrong time? It has to be on account of something. And there's 5 categories that we allow. Political opinion. So if I'm a political activist and I'm targeted for that. Religion, right? If I'm part of a religious minority and I get targeted by that. Race. Nationality. I don't totally understand how nationality functions. I've never worked in an asylum claim with nationality. But this is the big one, particular social group. I work with transgender women who are squarely a particular social group. I mostly do transgender asylum claims, and we just say to the judge, look, this woman experienced violence that the government was unable to control on account of the fact that she was transgender. This is clearly a particular social group that she falls into. Unions, that's sometimes political, that's sometimes a social group. There's all sorts of, that's what we spend a lot of time in court arguing about, is this is a social group. This is a social group. The asylum definition is really, really, really complicated. And so that's the international mechanism that's supposed to be, it's a common legal definition. The problem is the UN has said this is a crime against humanity, what's going on. But and honestly, I'm a little bit out of my expertise here in understanding how we enforce international laws. But we do have a common global definition for everyone who's signatories to the Refugee Convention of what a refugee is. And all these countries are finding different ways to enforce it. Look, there's a global crisis happening now with migration. And, we all, I think we spend a lot of time looking at Europe and criticizing the way they deal with their migrants without looking at oh my God, we're doing the exact same thing on our border, if not worse. And so this isn't an easy question, especially for the international community to deal with, but we are signatories to that convention. What else? Oh yeah, there you go.
Oh, I'm sorry. You answered actually a lot of my questions about what constitutes an asylum claim and the Attorney General's changes to that, although if you have more words to say on that, that's great, because I'm curious how that works. One thing that I see passed around on the internet is the point that why don't the refugees go to an American embassy somewhere in Mexico or Guatemala or somewhere in the central United States? And what's a good way to debunk that? Because clearly
Sure.
they're fleeing, and they're fleeing up here to our border because everything's crazy there. But this point I see continually raised.
It's not an option. You can't go to an American embassy or consulate in a foreign country and ask for protection. They will not acknowledge an asylum claim there. You have to be at the border. And a lot of people say, like, well, why didn't they just ask for asylum in Mexico? Good question. It's very difficult. Mexico is a very, very difficult place to get asylum. Very, very harsh and discriminatory environment for Central Americans. Far more violent, like sort of on its surface than the United States is. And our government actually pays Mexican forces to be violent to migrants to keep them from our southern border. It's called the Plan Frontera Sur, and it's under the Obama administration. They set it up. So, and then a lot of reasons people come to our border rather than stop in Mexico and ask the Mexican government for asylum is because there's pull factors as well. We talked about the push factors, but there's also pull factors. If you're a Central American, like you have family here, right? And you have economic choices that you don't have in Mexico. People like to sort of get angry in asylum law and saying like, if they're coming for a job or coming to be reunited to family, they can't possibly also be political asylees. And you're like, well, they can. Their life can be in danger, and the best choice they can possibly be making for their family is to come to the United States. And stopping in Mexico is not a wise choice. So you have the right to decide where you want to ask for political asylum. What you can't do is ask for asylum every place along the way. I mean, what I'm saying is, if you can ask the Mexican government for asylum, and many people do, and if your claim fails, then you head north and ask for it in the United States. You can't get asylum or any form of immigration status in Mexico and then come to the US and ask for political asylum. They won't give it to you. They're like, you're Mexican now. Have fun. So I hope that answers your question. It's not an option to ask at the embassy or the consulate. Yeah, hi.
Hi. So based on the point that you mentioned earlier, why doesn't the U.S. have refugee camps? And would setting that up in the U.S. be kind of help the problem between the two opposite sides, which is one is a family separation versus Flores?
Yes, it would. I think that what you need to understand, though, is that our immigration policies are not about the health and safety of our immigrant populations. They're about criminalizing immigrant populations. People always ask me well, if you're so smart, what would you do to solve this problem? Look, I'm not that smart. But what I do know is any discussion about how to solve this problem, you just had a good one. Oh, why don't we set up a refugee camp? Why don't we set up a safe, welcoming, air-conditioned spot for them to stay while we sort through this mess? It's because we have this deeply entrenched need in this country to punish people for migrating. And if we welcome them and we treat them humanely, then they are not being punished for the need to migrate through this world, and that is an American value that we have to enforce. So you're right. Why don't we do that? It's because our politicians can't let go of the fact that bringing someone in and making them comfortable and trying to sort through their very complicated problems would mean that maybe more people would come. And we have to punish them to see that you're not allowed to do this. You can't just come here and do this. So they have to be punished so they know that. And that's why we're not doing it in the United States. And that's why we're not doing it in Mexico. There's this very reasonable, very reasonable issue when you talk about asylum law called the floodgate issue, right? If we're too welcoming, if we're too kind, then 50 million people are going to arrive, and then what the hell do we do with all those people, right? And it's a reasonable thing. And I'm saying, I get that that's a problem. That is a reasonable thing to talking about. But the only way we're going to figure out what to do about that problem is if we stop talking about morality, about right and wrong, about criminality, and start thinking about these populations as people that we need to work a global solution, a humane and global solution on how to try to solve it. I mean, think about the gang violence in Central America. It's bad. Wait till 20 years from now when global warming gets hotter and hotter and you can't grow food in Central America. You can't. How long can you go when there's gang violence in your community? Maybe a few years. How long do you go when you can't eat? A few days. And so this is something that we have to sort through now and figure out how we're going to humanely deal with now because these problems are not going away. Does that answer your question a little bit?
Yeah, it does.
Okay.
Thank you.
Anyone else have a question? Oh yeah, hi.
Hi, could you speak a little bit more about the children who've already been separated?
Oh yeah, so from what I understand, a lot of them are in ORR shelter, which ORR shelters are not the camps you're seeing on the border. A lot of these places are homes, like children's homes. I have a lot of clients who have been in them, and they're like little boys' homes or girls' homes. Southwest Key is one of the corporations that runs them. They're all over the country. And I don't know exactly the bed space, but what happened was we exceeded the bed space about a month ago when we started separating kids. We were like, oh, we have no place to put them. So they sent up that tent city in Tornillo, Texas. And I heard, there's a lot of like rightful speculation on what's happening to the kids there. I just had someone just make a report back to me, and she said that they're in air-conditioned tents. It's horrible. But they're being cared for. I've been in them before, and it's kind of, I don't want to soften the blow of what's happening, but like it's a lot more orderly and a lot more loving environment than you can sometimes picture in your imagination. The camps I've been in have been under the control of the BCSF, BCFS, the Baptist Children Family Services or something, and they get all these young contractors to come and care for the kids while they're in these facilities. I was there, there was a 6-to-1 adult ratio for all the kids, and they were playing a lot of soccer, watching a lot of this same movie over and over again, but kids like watching the same movie over and over again. I was like, how many times can you watch the movie Cars in the tent I was working in? Like 100 times in 1 week. It was crazy. But, So that's where they are. And from what I understand, they're trying to reunite them with their parents. Because a lot of parents are getting out. Like, it's a mess on the border. And it's pretty insane. I heard they were thinking of doing DNA testing because infants can't identify their parents, right? They can't say, like, my mother is Allegra Love. And so they are starting to consider doing DNA testing because they didn't think what was going to happen. They took the kids and then didn't have a plan for reuniting them. And it's astonishing, it's staggering to think of the implications of DNA testing people on our border to reunite them with their kids, having like a database of people's DNA who were already trying to harm. But so from what I understand, the kids are there, they're trying to reunite them with family, biological parents first, if the parents have managed to get out of their detention thing. And I heard one of my friends is working in a male jail in a jail for men in Georgia, and they're like putting up like pictures of kids, being like, "Is this your kid?" It's a mess. But like the idea is, of course, the mandate is that they are there as soon as possible are reunited with someone who can care for them, and that's where I think it's at. Again, it's changing on a daily basis, and the reports are like a little bit, like I'm not getting like a strong report. I'm actually sending I just mentioned, we're sending staff members down starting Monday to be working in the borderlands. So hopefully I'm gonna have a better report. And so if you wanna sign up for our mailing list on your way out, I'll make sure to keep everyone updated about what we are hearing firsthand. Yeah, hi. Let's wait for the mic so the video feed can catch it.
Okay. What exactly was a family unit? You said it was the mom and a child.
Mm-hmm.
Why not the father as
Because
well?
we don't have facilities that can hold men and their children. It's a very matriarchal system where they say children belong with their mothers, and so we're going to create prison facilities for mothers and their children to be together, but we don't have any bed space for fathers and their children to be together. These fathers are like the hidden victims of this crisis, is that, ask any dad, do you want to be separated from your kid? A lot of them are stoic and like, well, if it means my wife and kid are safe, I'll take it. But I work with dads out in Cibola who have been separated from their kids, and they are devastated. And the saddest thing is I don't have any access to these kids. people are like, give me access to the kids. Like, I can't get access to the kids. I'm not even allowed to call ICE and ask them for, like, I can't submit like an entry of appearance on behalf of the parent as a legal representative and get access to the kids. There's this hotline that you're supposed to call to like boop, 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 and like find your kid, which is insane. And also all these like liberal activists are calling the line because they want to complain about all this and like voice their rage, and they're jamming up the line that the parents are supposed to use to actually find their kids. So unfortunate. So one of the things is if you're Googling where to call your representatives, make sure you're going to your representatives and you're not calling the hotline that's supposed to be used for parents to be reunited with their kids. It's a mess. But just make sure, like, if you're doing your part, you're not jamming up that hotline. I forget what your question was.
It was about dads.
Yeah, dads suffering. And I mean, just if I can mention dads for one more second, when we see women and children in cages in the border, it shocks our senses and we rise up as a community. But we've been doing this to immigrant men for decades, and we have become so comfortable with the sight of men of color being imprisoned in this country that we see photos of it, we see footage of it, and we do nothing. And I think we really need to examine that and say, why haven't we responded to this for men? What have we become so comfortable in our society with men, brown men in jumpsuits, that we can see images of it and it doesn't make us want to puke? But when we see women and children, it does. Like, let's think a little, I'm like such a feminist, so I'm like, but let's think a little bit about the men in this situation, and let's keep them in the same place that we're keeping women and children, because it has been on their backs, their suffering, their suffering is like, been for decades and decades, and it's their suffering that we've built the suffering of women and children on. Yeah.
So you were talking about like the process where a lot of the asylum seekers, they go to like immigrant courts. So what is like the final step or the deciding factor that really chooses they get detained or?
Gosh, I wish I knew. This is what I do for a living. This is the only law I practice right now is asylum court. And you have to go and I present as the lawyer like a legal brief explaining to the judge why this person deserves asylum. And they come and they give about 4 hours of testimony. And then we present any corroborating evidence that we have. And at the end, the judge says, yes, you get asylum, or no, you get asylum. No, you don't. Now, what's interesting about that is, as with all courts in America, like, that's not the end. You can appeal. But if you're detained and I can be like, okay, you just lost, we can have you deported, or you can appeal, you're probably going to be detained another year if we try and appeal. And then if you lose at that level, we can appeal in federal court. That's probably going to be another 2 years, right? And so with this, like, indefinite detention, what it does is people start to be like, I don't know if I can do another day detained. I just got a client out on asylum because he lost, we appealed, we remanded, they appealed again, we remanded again. It took 18 months to get him out. He lost 40 pounds. Guess what? He turned himself into the port of entry, asked for political asylum, never broke a single law of the United States, and spent 18 months in a jumpsuit in federal prison waiting for that. He finally won political asylum last month, and he's free. He's living in Albuquerque. But that's the extent that it takes. And one of the things you'll notice about immigration prisons is, they're in places where there's no lawyers. Cibola County, nope, no immigration lawyers there. I have to drive 150 miles every time I want to go see a client out there. When you have a lawyer with you in an asylum claim, you're 10 times more likely to prevail. So it's in the government's best interest to put these prisons in places where there are no lawyers. And so I wish I could tell you the one deciding factor. It's a really, really complicated thing, which is why you need counsel to get through it. And to get through it quickly and decisively the first time so you don't have to appeal and stay detained for a really long time. Yeah.
You said that the executive branch is in charge of enforcement. What about the latest Trump issue? He's going to eliminate due process, immediate deportation.
I know. I read that and was just like, my head spinning. I don't know what this means. What he's trying to say is, let's not have courts. Let's just deport everyone. And you know, you'd have to change the Immigration and Nationality Act. The Immigration and Nationality Act is the statute that governs how all of this operates. Like, under Section I of the INA 240B is what, like, I'm allowed to bring my clients to asylum court. So he's just blowing a lot of steam there. Like, it would take Congress to change the INA to eliminate these procedures that are set up. And, like, I don't, quite frankly, see our Congress doing anything at all in the next long while, but it's something to keep your eye on. But the president can't change people's right to go to court. Although I've seen it all lately, so I'm not going to say it's not going to happen. I just, like, theoretically, that it's the Immigration Nationality Act governs the procedures around this and the Code of Federal Regulations, and that's all managed by our lawmakers, Congress. Yeah. And we are getting close to the end, so maybe just one more question, and I am always happy to stick around and answer questions if you want to talk privately, if you want to challenge me, if you want to, whatever. But I just want to give you guys some good tips about how to move forward. So let's make this the last Q&A question, and then I can do that, and then we can disperse.
My second one, so if anyone else wants to go. Okay, great. Speaking of dubious legal activities, there was also the news reports of the mass hearings for immigrants, and what is the status of those? What is going on there?
Right. So I think in the past there's been times that, like, there have been mass arraignments in the immigration context, but what I think this is what I think is happening, and this is speculation, so sorry internet viewers, like, I'm not an expert on what's going on because I've only heard rumors of it too, and I've never witnessed it, and I haven't talked to a lawyer who's been there. I think what's happening with the mass arraignments is when people are being charged with that misdemeanor, they're being held in mass charging and arraignments to get them through that, and then getting put into ICE custody. So they'll hold them for a little while, but our federal prisons can't hold this many people, and so they're doing mass arraignments to have them just plead guilty to it, and then move into immigration custody after they've been separated from their kids. Does that make sense? Yeah. So I think that's what that's referring to. Sometimes I've seen in the past, or heard about in the past, mass arraignments at, like, they'll make, like, makeshift setups in like outside, like, a workplace raid, where, like, you can just plead guilty to this and get deported and quickly, rather than be detained indefinitely, and people will sign their deportations in like a quasi-judicial setting. The other time this is getting really into, like, the Immigration and Nationality Act, but people who are not claiming asylum, who are just on our border, above our border, without any sort of visa or paperwork, are subject to this thing called expedited removal, and it's really quick. No due process. But once you ask for political asylum, you're pulled out of the expedited removal process and put into the asylum track, which is what is going on with all these families. Normally they would just, Mexican migration is at a net negative right now. The people who are arriving at the country are asylum seekers. We don't have a crisis on our border. I think that's like we don't have a crisis on our border. We don't. We have asylum seekers who are peacefully seeking entry in our country to ask for help. And the crisis that Trump is referring to has been dissipating since, the Obama administration crackdown, and we're at, like, it's pretty calm right now, except that we have all these asylum seekers. Okay, so I have like a few more minutes. I just want to talk to you about things that you can do as an activist. You're all here now learning. I really urge you to continue to talk about this. Take some risks in your conversation with how you talk about this, how you inform other people about what you learned tonight, and to only trust really solid sources in terms of, like, what you choose to share, like, electronically. Don't be seduced by headlines that seem too good to be true. In that respect, we sent out a newsletter. I just sent one out today, and I can send it out to anyone who wants to sign up. But Olivia, our volunteer back there, will be happy to write your email address down if you want to get on our newsletter, and we'll let you know about any other classes that we're holding, and we're always happy to come back and do more trainings. The other thing is, I know you've all heard this, is donate to people that are able to rapidly respond in this situation. $5, $20, $2 million, $20 million in the case of Raices. It all helps. Some woman gave me a check today and she said, it's just a drop in the bucket. And I was like, but lots of drops fill a bucket. If you need any help finding the right place for you that feels good to donate, please email me. And all our contact information is in the back. I'm happy to find some place that feels good to you to be donating. One of the places that people have been donating, and Raices, the organization, just raised $20 million, is for bond funds. Because often immigration parents can get bonds, but they can't afford to pay them. $5,000 will get you out of here, says the judge, and they don't have the money to do it. And so giving a small amount of money, as you can see, we raised $20 million for bond funds with Raices. I submit that Raices has enough money, and if you need help finding another grassroots organization or another group seeking bonds, I'm more than happy to help you figure that out. You can also donate to Santa Fe Dreamers. I'm hearing my board right now in my head being like, tell them to donate to you. If that makes you happy, check out our website. We will absolutely use your money in the most honest and aggressive way to help immigrant families in a way that I hope you trust us to do. What else can we do? Look into alternatives to detention. If you sign up for our email list, I can send you an email about this. There are alternatives to detention. Now, you guys know by now I'm against criminalizing migrants. But if there's options, instead of detaining them, we can put ankle bracelets on them. It's 2018. We have all sorts of technology that can keep track of people and make sure that they show up at their hearings. I mean, that's the big fear, right? If we let them go, they're not going to come to their hearing to do their asylum case. Well, you can put an ankle bracelet on someone. There's family case management plans that cost $36 a day for the entire family unit versus $330 per night for every individual. I mean, it's not hard to do the math that one is easier than the other and one doesn't cause people to suffer, right? Detention Watch Network is a really great place to start exploring alternatives to detention. The other thing we can do is, if this horrifies you, start looking into how our politicians are accepting money from corporate detention facilities. There's a movement that you can explore, I don't know much about it, to divest from corporate facilities. And a really interesting thing happened today. Last Friday, an article came out from New Mexico In Depth that was showing all the contributions that New Mexico Democrats had taken from GEO Group and Core Civic. Well, fantastically, Hector Balderas, who is our Attorney General, Ben Ray Lujan, and Heinrich all came out today saying they would no longer take corporate correctional contributions and that they were giving the money they took in the last couple of years to charity to fight this cause. Am I disgusted with the hypocrisy they've been showing about this for years? Absolutely. But I would much rather encourage them to lead in this way and to be examples for other politicians around the country. Then I have so much more interest in that than like shaming them for that hypocrisy. We need to encourage politicians who are absolutely doing the right thing like that if we're gonna be, like, it's an interesting thing, the prison divestment, and it's a hard thing when you live in rural America and these prisons provide a lot of jobs for reasonable people, right? It's complicated. Again, let's talk about that. Let's talk about how to get jobs that don't hurt people into those rural areas. We can talk about all of that in the same conversation. We don't have to make immigrants suffer to get people jobs in New Mexico. What else can you do? I don't know. Is that enough stuff for now? Let me think. Well, there's a rally in Santa Fe at 6:30 at the Roundhouse on Saturday night. I think I'm going to be speaking. I kind of hope not. I'm kind of sick of hearing myself talk about this, and I hope it's really immigrant-centered. But there's going to be a lot of people there, and this will be a chance to stand, if you're interested, to like stand with people who also are feeling interested and excited about this and come together as a state. And there's one in Albuquerque too. Has anyone else heard of anything? I don't think that's happening. Yeah. Because it conflicted with Pride. Am I wrong? Oh, I don't know. I think it changed. I think they joined forces for the 6:30 rally, if I understand. I've also received 11 trillion emails this week, so I can't quite keep track of the news. But I think they joined forces because it was conflicting with Pride, and they wanted, like, well, people aren't going to come to 2 rallies for immigrant justice, so they put them together. And I think it's being led by Somos Un Pueblo Unido, which is an immigrants' rights organization in Santa Fe. Santa Fe Dreamers Project or Allegra Love, my name. My stuff's public. It has nothing to do with my actual life. It's all my immigration activism, and you're welcome to friend me and I'll accept it. Sure. Our federal, well, for me, if I was doing the call, I mean, I cannot put words into people's mouths. I don't know where everyone stands here politically. When I call my federal officials, if I'm talking to Tom Udall, say, I'm saying, Tom, I disapprove of everything that's happening on the border right now. I think we need to abolish ICE. I'm extreme. Abolish ICE. I think we need to defund, dramatically defund our immigration enforcement. I think that we need to seek to get all the kids who've been separated reunified with their families as quickly as possible. I think that we need to eradicate family detention in our country, and that we need to divest from corporate correctional facilities in our state. That's what I say. And that I'm not going to vote for you unless I hear you talk about this before November. And trust me, I won't. That's what I say to politicians.
So I was noticing some articles about the military building detention camps for children and adults. Do you have any more information on that?
I don't. I heard that rumor, and it's very credible to me because that's what Artesia was, and it was on a military base, a federal law enforcement training facility. My guess is if it happens in New Mexico, it'll either be in Artesia or Fort Bliss. I guess this is my guess, but this is my educated guess. I think that what we're seeing right now with the drawdown on prosecutions is time and space to get those facilities up and running. And in a manner that's not going to be so chaotic and not so optically terrible, so that it can be done effectively. That's my guess. Again, I get some pretty inside information, but I haven't heard anything directly about that. So I think it's 7:30. If you want to get on our mailing list, if you want to check out our website, if you want to make a donation, all that material's back there, and our wonderful volunteer Olivia, who's mad at me for even mentioning her name. Can you wave, Olivia? She's right there to help you with any of that. I really, if you want to talk to me afterwards, if you want to ask a question, if you want to share a comment, I'm psyched to stick around. I just want to thank you guys for, yeah, Tracy? I know, but the dates are changing because the permit got messed up. So keep in touch with us. We're going to have a big old concert in the rail yard for some summer fun and some fun awareness raising rather than listening to me lecture at you for an hour and a half in a church. Oh yeah. Well, you can go to our website and there's a button that says, I want to join the mailing list. But you can also write your email down on a list that Olivia has, and one of my interns will input it into our MailChimp account tomorrow. And they're like probably so bad at me for saying that, but that's what they're going to do. Okay? So thank you so much for turning out. Thank you for being committed to this.